Hello. The following video is a presentation I gave for my colleagues at my organization, and it's a video that explains dream analysis for therapists. And so I'm sharing that with you because the presentation was pretty fun to put together, and I'm happy with how it turned out. Now, the video itself is about 40 minutes, my presentation, and then the remaining 20 minutes are for kind of like a Q&A thing with some of my colleagues, which you should also check out because they asked a lot of really interesting questions from some interesting perspectives. So yeah, hope you enjoy it.
But yeah, so welcome. I've been doing dream analysis for about 5 years as a hobby, and professionally, pretty much since I started my practicum. And that includes both my own dreams as well as like the dreams of people who submit them to me. Um, and I've been kind of finding it uh, immensely beneficial for clients as it opens up this whole new perspective on their minds. It gives them a window into a totally different realm of the minds that they may be unfamiliar with. And I find that it can foster more self love, more self acceptance, and more self trust. And many of my clients, as well as the people I work for more as a hobby, have been really positively transformed and have made significant progress on a lot of their goals just because we analyzed their dreams. It can have like a lot of tangential effects that you weren't even aiming for. And so, yeah, it can be really beneficial in so many different ways. And hopefully, this presentation makes it clear why that's the case and why dream analysis can be so beneficial. Um, so the model of dream analysis I will be presenting was developed by Carl Jung, who is this gentleman here on the left. Um, Hence why it's called Jungian dream analysis. Jung was widely regarded as one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. And over the course of his career, he was said to have analyzed over 80,000 dreams, from which he developed a very robust theory of how dreams function and what purpose they served. And the reason I have Sigmund Freud here on the right, and both these gentlemen clearly enjoy smoking, is that Jung was commonly considered a disciple of Sigmund Freud, something which he himself would probably deny vehemently. If you read his writings, he would just say, "No, I was never his disciple. He was kind of my influence." Um, but Sigmund Freud developed his own theories about dreams, which were largely based on repression of certain impulses, particularly sexual impulses. And he pretty much explained dreams as like where your fantasies go because you have to repress them during the day. Um, and Jung basically took these ideas, but widened their scope and expanded on them greatly to kind of demonstrate that that's not all there is happening when it comes to dreams. That can happen, but it's not necessarily the entire function of dreams. I guess this kind of begs the question: what are dreams? Well, dreams appear to be spontaneous images generated by the unconscious mind. But this kind of begs the question of what we mean by the unconscious mind. So this is going to get pretty theoretical, but hopefully you'll see why it's necessary to establish all of this theory. But you might have seen this image, which shows that our conscious mind is kind of like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to our minds, and that so much of our mentality is actually unconscious. So your consciousness basically refers to your awareness. So that's the part of your mind through which things are explicitly known and through which things are deliberately controlled. So, for example, if I say you are now breathing consciously, that kind of brings your awareness to your breath, and now you're breathing with more conscious intention. Whereas before, you might have been breathing, but like no conscious awareness. It was just happening automatically. And the same can be said of the mind in general. You're experiencing sensations right now, you're having thoughts, you're experiencing emotions, feelings, perceptions. Automatic behaviors, automatic instincts, and intuitions, which you don't recognize at a conscious level until they rise up out of the unconscious and make their presence known. And in this field of psychology, it's typically understood that everything that is unconscious wants to be made conscious. And so dreams seem to be an expression of this fact that things that exist in the unconscious will eventually rise up and be known to the conscious mind. A very important feature of consciousness is what is known as the ego. So if you think back to Psych 101, when you learn about Freud's id, ego, and superego, the ego is a really essential component of this because it's essentially your sense of self or your sense of I-ness. And it's built up of your conscious beliefs about yourself as well as your conscious beliefs about the world. So anything you tend to associate with yourself, if I ask you, describe yourself, and anything you kind of say, that goes into building your ego, your conception of yourself. Which is held in consciousness. I like to think of the ego as a character you are playing in the role of your life. And it's kind of interesting when you realize that you are kind of playing a character. Like I'm playing a character of a therapist, but I'm not always playing that character. Sometimes I'm playing the character of a goofy idiot who, does things for fun. Um, and so your ego is really responsible for constructing a narrative in which you play the role of the main character in your life. And this narrative organizes what you do on a day-to-day basis, allowing you to structure your activities in a more deliberate and explicit manner in a much more focused way. So you're not just doing whatever your impulses tell you to do, you're directing yourself very deliberately, and like following a schedule, for example. And you can think of it as like the main coordinator of your daily life or like the captain of your mental ship. Your ego commands the rest of your body to do what it needs to do. In modern psychological parlance, we tend to equate the ego with executive functioning and even with short-term memory. So, say for example, like you're trying to read a book, and then suddenly you start wondering about what you should eat for dinner that night. Um, it's your ego that may jump in and redirect yourself back to your book. And so it's playing this role of kind of narrowing your attention, so that whatever it is you're doing, you can focus on that with greater deliberate effort. And this is a kind of useful metaphor, is that the ego essentially acts as a gatekeeper or a barrier to the contents of your conscious mind. It's directing your conscious mind and therefore filters what kind of contents, what kind of experiences are allowed to be experienced consciously, and it can push thoughts or feelings away into the unconscious. So, say for example, you start to feel an unpleasant emotion. Maybe, like for example, you're reminded of like an ex-lover or something. Your ego can choose to either allow that emotion to be experienced, or it can choose to push that emotion away in order to avoid experiencing it. And so the emotion then ends up in your unconscious mind. Another common example is like imagine you encounter somebody and you have a negative opinion of them, but you want to be polite to them, and so you kind of push those opinions and those thoughts aside, and then you put on this polite social mask while engaging with this person. And so all of the negative impressions that you have are suddenly set aside and pushed into the unconscious momentarily, where they can reappear in other circumstances. I know I'm going like very heavy on the ego here, but it is really important to understand what role it's playing in our waking life. And another significant role of the ego is that it's responsible for our logic and rationality. So when you hear your inner monologue, which not everybody has an inner monologue, but it's basically your ego that is speaking, and it's constantly attempting to understand the world in terms of your prior beliefs. So whatever beliefs you've absorbed and developed about the world and about yourself, your ego is constantly trying to understand the world in a way that's consistent with those prior beliefs. I like this metaphor as well. I like to think of it as being kind of like the foundations of your worldview, and the ego is basically the executor of your worldview, whatever that is. And if you think about how it's more logical, more rational, for example, if you see dark clouds in the sky, you may logically conclude that it could rain soon because you have consciously understood that there's a causal connection between those two events. So it's also common that if you experience something which initially kind of confuses you and can't be understood rationally, your ego will try to rationalize it in order to make sense, in a way that feels familiar and in a way that feels consistent with how your beliefs about the world work. Um, now, the ego is often said to have a very rigid structure, kind of like this solid crystal. And once a person's beliefs are formed, they crystallize and they consolidate. And it's very often difficult to decrystallize these beliefs. So a person may have very dysfunctional beliefs about themselves or about the world. And so oftentimes the goal of therapy is to help transform the client's ego to develop a healthier conception of themselves, or to change their dysfunctional beliefs about the world. But this can be really difficult. since the ego naturally tries to defend itself and maintain its previous structure. So just think of people who get like very defensive when their beliefs are challenged or threatened in any way. This is their ego attempting to preserve its previous foundations and avoid being decrystallized. It's a very natural thing, but it can be very dysfunctional if a person's ego isn't shaking and they're kind of holding on to their previous worldview. Um, Now, furthermore, it's typical that people pretty much believe that their ego is their entire self. But this isn't exactly true. It's only the part of the self which appears in consciousness. Usually, we say that there are deeper hidden parts of a person's self which exist in the unconscious, which either they don't recognize or they deliberately hide. And this picture demonstrates the Jungian model of the psyche. We don't need to get lost in the details here, but just know that there's more to a person than their ego. Um, so I mentioned all of this to draw you to the curious fact that having an ego constantly filtering your mental experience is very exhausting cognitively. The reason why capitalism works and why we can work from 9 to 5 is because we have a very stringent ego that can direct our energy towards this very deliberate task, and then we have to rest afterwards. And this is so true that when we go to sleep for an extended period of time, the ego breaks down entirely so that it has a chance to rest. You may have heard of the term ego death, which is basically this idea of like when you lose your sense of self. And sleep is a form of ego death because it seems that when you go to sleep, your ego completely disappears. And when the ego disappears, this filtering ability that I've been referring to also disappears. And so now your mind is flooded with all sorts of thoughts and images which you previously excluded because of your ego. This means that dreams can give us access to the side of a person which is not embodied by their ego. And all of the thoughts, feelings, and intuitions, which are typically concealed by their egos. So it's really like exploring an entirely different world. And I find that clients and even myself, we can be very enthralled when we explore the hinterlands of our minds and we encounter ideas which the ego would not ordinarily conceive because those foundations are, for a moment, kind of torn down. It's also important to note that dreams can occur in any stage of sleep, but are most common and most intense during what's known as REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. Um, and the absence of an ego means that dreams are very often illogical and very irrational. And I'm sure you've experienced this if you've experienced dreams. You're just kind of like thrown into this situation, this very complex situation, and it's not explained how you even got there, but you just roll with it as though it makes perfect sense. You may encounter totally absurd situations without even questioning whether these situations make sense. For example, I once dreamed that my house was made of jello, and it didn't occur to me like how random and unusual this was. You just kind of like go along with it as though it makes perfect sense. Like, oh yeah, of course my house is made of jello. Why would it be otherwise? Your ego is not there to apply your prior beliefs and check whether the world is consistent with your rational understanding of the world. And so you don't even question the absurdity of whatever is unfolding. Like another example, like one time I was being chased by Thanos from the Avengers, except he was the size of a skyscraper. And it never occurred to me of like how weird this was. It's just like, oh no, I'm being chased and I must do something about it. And so, yeah, I'm sure you've experienced very strange dreams like that, that just logically didn't make any sense, but you weren't capable of being logical in order to recognize that it made no sense. There is an exception to this, however. The ego can return when you are dreaming in a phenomenon known as lucid dreaming, when you suddenly realize that you were in a dream and you're consciously aware of this fact. Now, this is really cool because you can then explore your dream space more deliberately. You can talk to people in your dream with more intention, and you can also just experiment. Very interestingly, I actually had a lucid dream last night. Early on when I was sleeping, and it actually hasn't happened in a while. But in the past, I used to experience a lot of lucid dreams, and they were so cool. Like I would fly around in my dreams, I would like talk to celebrities, and all sorts of things. But generally speaking, most dreams you lack an ego, and this causes an uprush of unconscious contents to spring up. And this is because, again, it's no longer possible for the ego to censor the unconscious. And so this really gives us a window into what a person is like unconsciously, because otherwise we get a very one-sided picture of that person, since we tend to only encounter their egos. Another consequence of the fact that the ego is no longer present is that people can often experience very deep and profound emotions in their dreams, especially if they tend to repress such emotions consciously. The emotions end up in the unconscious, where they are experienced in dreams, since the ego can no longer conceal them. And this is why it's very common for people to experience very deep, very intense emotions in their dreams, giving rise to speculation that dreams may play some role in emotional regulation. Now, we should honestly think of dreams as being a kind of language, like a very different language from spoken language, but a language nonetheless. In fact, many have speculated that this language is older than spoken language, since there's good evidence that animals also dream. And I'll get into what this language consists of, but it's important to distinguish between signs and symbols. A sign is something which corresponds to a specific meaning, like, for example, a stop sign or even words themselves, because each word usually has like a definite, unambiguous meaning, although one can be metaphorical and poetic with words, but most of the time, any word has like a definite meaning, and it's not ambiguous what the meaning is. Symbols, on the other hand, are the language of the unconscious. The images which arise from dreams are symbols. They have a deeper meaning which needs to be interpreted. This is usually a metaphorical meaning rather than a literal meaning. And so when you approach dreams, it's important to not take things too literally and instead treat everything you observe as a metaphor. So it's representing something deeper, and it has to be kind of analyzed. And it's also possible that there are many different competing interpretations, which again kind of just speaks to the complex nature of this symbolic language. But again, it's these ideas that are being expressed in the dream are usually ideas which are really hard to put into words, which is why this alternative method of communication, i.e., symbols, is being used in order to communicate these ideas. So, for example, mythology is a really like useful way, a useful thing to look into and to understand when analyzing dreams. But mythology often contains symbols. That is, ideas that are expressed in stories and narrative form. So, for example, you might be familiar with the myth of Icarus. This is a symbol which expresses many complicated ideas of like, what does it mean to fly too close to the sun? Like something about ambition, something about hubris, right? And so this is an idea that's being expressed through a story and through a narrative. And what about the myth of Sisyphus, who was this Greek guy who was destined to carry a rock up a hill for eternity? What does that represent symbolically? Something about like the monotony of daily life, the pointlessness, the seeming pointlessness of life. It's expressing those kind of ideas, but it's not doing so in a just like by kind of explaining it through words. It's presenting it as an image. Um, and so dreams are like myths that our brains spontaneously generate, and they usually have a deeper meaning expressed in imagistic form. And you have to wrap your minds around them in order to understand the deeper meaning. Meaning that dream analysis can often be a very complicated matter, and it's not a straightforward science. I'll get more into that in a second. But why should therapists care about their clients' dreams? And why should therapists be the ones to analyze the client's dreams? Well, there are a few good reasons. The first is that dreams often express very taboo ideas, which may potentially paint the client in a negative light, such as dreams about murder or dreams about infidelity, which tend to be rather common. And it may be hard for clients to explore these dreams because of their taboo nature. Well, the therapeutic context, with its confidentiality and its non judgment, provides the right space in order for clients to explore the ideas generated by their unconscious minds without worrying about the taboo content of their dreams. And so the therapeutic space is definitely the right place to be analyzing dreams. Um, Also, therapists in general should have some understanding of psychology, and so they just that knowledge itself can be useful when approaching dreams. Another reason is because there are limits to traditional talk therapy. So all of us as therapists, we tend to engage with our clients through conversations, and what I'm going to say is a bit oversimplified, but for most people, their ability to speak comes from a particular region on the left hemispheres of their brains. This is significant because neuroscience has revealed that the right and left hemispheres of the brain have slightly different personalities. And so when a person speaks, there's this sense in which you're only speaking to half of them. That might have been clear from the whole ego discussion that you're really only engaging with their ego. So, and this is okay. And obviously, this can be very helpful. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do this as therapists, but analyzing dreams can give you a much more complete understanding of a person, specifically the part of the person which isn't embodied by their egos. And so, it again, the unconscious is speaking this other language, and it's a really good idea for therapists to attune themselves to that language. And again, words are very useful, but words tend to be very one-sided, and also there's a lot which can't be expressed in words. I'm reminded of the Ludwig Wittgenstein quote, whereof one cannot speak, one must remain silent. And so what there might be a lot going on in a client's life, in a client's mind, that they can't put into words. And so a dream can kind of give you access to that other side. So while talk therapy can deepen your understanding of a person's ego, which is important, dream analysis can grant you an understanding of the other side of a person, usually the side of a person which they themselves are unaware of. Dreams often explore what a person is really like, independently of the ego, because the ego is only a small part of a person's personality. And yet it often feels like, from a first person perspective, like it's the entire personality. But really, there are significant parts of a person's mind which they are unaware of. And this is true of everybody. And so dreams grant us the opportunity to explore this other side. I go back to this foundation metaphor. Another reason relates to something called the compensation theory. This is a really core idea in Jungian analysis, and which I think is probably the key to why dreams and analyzing dreams can be so helpful. This is the idea that dreams serve the function of correcting the one-sided attitude of the ego, because the ego often has a very narrow worldview, and so it thinks in a way which is very constrained. And it's really difficult to change this because it's very like solid, it's very rigid. It's like these foundations. And so they're very set in stone. But sleeping, because it momentarily dissolves a person's ego, it starts to undo those barriers. And so the dream can produce images and ideas which consider other perspectives, which go beyond the ego's rigidness. The unconscious has this very interesting creativity to it. It spontaneously generates ideas, and these ideas are no longer constrained by the ego and no longer in line with some of the foundational beliefs of the ego. And so it creates these brand new ideas. And so they're very useful for shifting a person's perspective and opening their minds, so to speak. Dreams are very creative and very open-minded. I probably demonstrated a couple dreams where that's true, where rationality just goes out the window. And so it kind of loosens a person's rigid ego in order to get them to think in a different way. And a lot of challenges come from, at least I've noticed, from a person's ego that is unwilling to loosen its foundations. And so a dream, since it's coming from that person's own mind, can help a person explore a different way of thinking, which is contrary to the way their ego normally thinks. And so if a person's ego is really a big barrier in that for them, if they're having dysfunctional beliefs about the world or about themselves, dreams can supply ideas which challenge that. And they're coming from a person's own mind. And so the utility of that is that since it's coming from their own mind, they're less likely to see it as antagonistic to their original perspective. Here's a really interesting example. I don't know if this image produces dread or produces fond memories of high school chemistry or university chemistry. For me, fond memories. I love chemistry, but I realize that like this isn't everybody's favorite thing. And this is the periodic table of elements. Interesting fact about the periodic table of elements is that it was not consciously conceived. A person didn't think deliberately and come up with this. It originated from a dream. This scientist named Dmitry Mendeleev, he was working on this problem and he couldn't come up with the right way to structure the elements, to organize the elements. And so he decided to go to sleep on the problem. And in his dream, the solution to the problem was given to him. And there's this quote from him: I saw in a dream a table where all elements fell into place as required. Awakening, I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper. Only in one place did a correction seem necessary. So I think this is really cool. Like this is a very complicated idea that this person was working on, and it's their unconscious mind which ultimately solves it. And so maybe you can think, maybe like for Mendeleev, his original way of thinking was just too rigid and too confined, and only when his mind was allowed to open did the solution present itself to him. And this is actually very common in dreams, where some kind of creative solution to a problem that a person is dealing with in their waking lives is spontaneously generated in the dream. It's very cool. There are a lot of examples of this. I've experienced this. Maybe you've experienced it as well. Um, and there are a lot of famous examples. I've only touched on that one because I find it to be the most interesting. But they're funny enough. There's a lot of like chemistry examples of like scientists coming up with like the right chemical structure or the right understanding of something in chemistry from their dreams. Um, but the idea here is that dreams are more creative and are unconstrained by the ego. They also tend to take ideas which we've absorbed consciously and play around with them in order to generate new insights or to use ideas that you've observed or things you've observed as brand new symbols to generate these new ideas. So again, we often think of irrationality as being a bad thing, but I think irrationality, especially in the context of dreams, can be very useful. Excuse me, it can be very life enriching. The reason being is that they offer a totally different way of thinking, and may even hold the solution to a problem which a person is facing. And again, this is just another reason why mining the unconscious can be so enriching and provides such useful, life enhancing insights. So, how, as a therapist, should you go about analyzing dreams? Hopefully, I've convinced you that dreams are worth analyzing. If not your client's dreams, then perhaps your own. So, how would you actually approach this? So, the first step is to have your clients keep a dream journal and record their dreams right after they wake up in the journal. The reason we ask, or it's a good idea to do so right after you wake up, is that you might have noticed dreams are really hard to remember. They're very fragmented, very scattered. And so if you can write them right when you wake up, that's when they're a bit more fresh. And also just the act of remembering can help you recall what else happened in the dream. And again, the reason dreams seem to be hard to remember is because the ego is absent. And the ego, if you recall earlier, is kind of equated with our short-term memory. And so your ability to hold on to memories is really reduced when you're in a dream. And so that's why kind of journaling right after you wake up is so helpful. And what I've actually been doing with my clients is they keep their journals in an email thread, which they send to me. That way I have access to their dreams and I can spend some time analyzing them before sessions. Also really interesting is that some clients, instead of providing me, or actually alongside the descriptions of their dreams that they send me, they also send me drawings. So they actually draw what they see in their dreams. So if you have clients who are more artistically inclined, you can have them draw some of the things which appear in their dreams. And it's actually really cool when you as a therapist can see what they experience in the dream and see what their mind has envisioned. The second thing to keep in mind is that dreams, again, are very symbolic. They are representing metaphorical ideas rather than literal ideas. And so the vibe and the approach that you want to use with dreams is going to be more similar to something like film analysis or literature analysis. If you remember in English class, like analyzing classic literature like Catcher in the Rye or 1984 or whatever, you're trying to understand the subtext. You're trying to provide interpretations, and you also are acknowledging the fact that there's not necessarily a correct interpretation. There are possibly multiple interpretations. The reason I put this image up is if you've seen the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling, this is a movie that's known for being very rich in symbolic imagery, including this scorpion on Ryan Gosling's jacket. And the film never explicitly says what the scorpion represents, but clearly it means something. And so it's up to you as the analyst to figure it out, to piece it together from all of the clues. So you need to consider what each symbol and every idea that appears in a dream, every person, every narrative is potentially a symbol. And it's up to you to figure out what that symbol could potentially represent. And again, it's representing something metaphorical, and it has that deeper meaning. And you always need to include the context of your client's life experiences. A good example of this is like if you see water in a dream, or like a lake, or like an ocean. You might think that I mean, very typically that could represent like the unknown, or like distant horizons or something like that. But what if your client almost drowned when he was young? What if your client is a professional swimmer? These kind of contextual clues may change the meaning of the symbol. And so you really need to add in the context of the client's life when deciphering the meaning of those symbols. The third reason, the third thing you need to consider when analyzing dreams is that dreams can be very ambiguous. And so you really need to treat dream analysis as more of an art rather than a science. There isn't a specific formula or procedure for how you should analyze dreams. It's a very go with the flow kind of thing. And you shouldn't act as though dreams have this unambiguous and definite meaning. And also, you aren't necessarily the expert when it comes to your client's unconscious. You're more there to just structure the process and guide things along. And it should really be the client who guides the analysis. And your role is more just to offer possibilities and ask a lot of questions and dig deep into things. Just to explore what's going on, and you offer possibilities totally as suggestions. Like, is it possible that this person represents this? And then see if the client is receptive to it, see if it makes sense to them. If it doesn't, then consider a different possibility. You yourself have to be rather open-minded when engaging with dreams. So like, for example, if a specific person appears in your dreams, your client's mom or your client's dad, it's useful to inquire into who this person is and why they are significant to the client. If specific images come up, such as animals, like ask the client, what does this animal mean to you? What could it mean in a symbolic sense? Do you have any history of this animal, if it's like a dog or a cow or whatever? So again, you need to be curious, you need to be open-minded. And instead of telling your client what dreams mean, you need to offer a few possible interpretations until something clicks or sparks new ideas. Now, this may sound like very unspecific and perhaps a little bit daunting because you're kind of just like going out into the open without a clear plan. But what Carl Jung found, and what I've been finding as I've been doing this, is that even if you don't have a clear direction, just thinking about the dream and turning it over and asking questions about it can be really enriching to the client and get the client to think more deeply about themselves and think more in that more open kind of mentality where they're considering other possibilities. And it's always important to remember, when you engage with your client, their unconscious mind will be present in the room when you're analyzing the dream. And there will usually come this moment where a certain interpretation clicks. And it'll be like this epiphany, because the unconscious will kind of, through this intuitive process, be like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I've been trying to say. And they'll sense it and they'll feel it. And so it's a really cool thing when you observe that, when you observe a client's kind of the other side of themselves spark up and through intuition make itself known and make itself clear that this interpretation is on the right track or is correct. Another useful thing, which this commonly appears in Jungian psychology, and so I thought I would bring it up here, is that it's useful to have some understanding of mythological, or what are often called archetypal motifs. Again, this is a big topic in Jungian psychology. But briefly, in mythology, we often see the same patterns and themes across different cultures and across different time periods. For example, the fight against the dragon and rescuing a princess is a very common archetype in myths and fairy tales. A more general idea is like the idea of like the hero's journey. Myths themselves are kind of like dreams and kind of arose in the same way. They're spontaneous creations that came out of the human mind. And so you'll very often encounter dreams that express ideas that are similar to mythology. And so knowing about mythology and religious symbolism can be a really useful way to guide the analysis and navigate your client's dreams. But again, overall, you want to be flexible and open-minded and propose rather than impose particular interpretations. So let's see this in practice. So it might be a bit more clear if I offer a particular example. So this is a dream that was very generously offered to me by a client of mine who gave me permission to use it. He's a very interesting dreamer, and his dreams are really, really rich with symbolic imagery. I'll call him Frank. Here's the dream. I've shortened it a little bit, even though it's still pretty long, but allow me to read it. I was in a castle, but in modern times, and I was in a group of people watching a crazy person dressed in clown makeup. This person was yelling loudly about something that everyone in the crowd found funny. Eventually, the crowd had enough and started trying to usher the crazy person onto a train attached to a zip line that went down from the castle. I helped get the crazy person in, but when the train started departing, I was the crazy person inside the train. I felt betrayed by everyone and didn't want to go wherever the train was headed. I was trying to explain that I didn't want to go, yelling through the window, but I could tell they weren't going to listen. Eventually, the train departed down the zip line and into a very muddy river. I was helped out by an ugly old woman who received me as if she was happy I'd returned home. I did feel at home with her. I was sad to be back out of the luxury of the castle, but I did feel at home and loved down in the mud with her and the river animals that began appearing. There was some sort of small hippo like creature, some warthog like creatures, and a porcupine. They spoke telepathically with me, and it was clear we were old friends. They talked negatively about the castle, then started showing me soccer jerseys they made with offensive national emblems. They showed me ones for the US, Japan, Ireland, Germany, and a few others. They explained that they made them all from the perspective of the countries that hate them as a joke that was supposed to exacerbate animosity that was currently being concealed, but they thought should be more out in the open between these countries. Then the porcupine showed me how it used its spikes by puffing up and swimming into another bigger animal, breaking off a bunch of spikes in them. Me and the other animals all went, oh, whoa, too far, and felt like the porcupine was being overly aggressive. So that's a really interesting thing for the mind to just spontaneously conjure up. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about what this could mean. Um, but let me tell you some facts about this client, which kind of emerged through dream analysis and just through conversations in general. This client had a very rebellious attitude in his youth, so much so that his parents actually forced him to go to some kind of like military camp, hoping to instill discipline in him, which happened, I think, just out of high school. And so he had this very rebellious attitude, but then he kind of had to put it away later in life. He also has what he describes as a trickster phase. This is when he was like really into pranks, really into graffiti, and he just loved to be a clown and just be like very obnoxious to people. But eventually, he started to see that this part of his personality was very annoying, and everyone around to everyone around him. And so he eventually stopped acting like a clown and became more serious. This client also expresses that he's insecure about his social standing, and one of the goals of his therapy is to increase his income. So we interpreted the castle, and the castles that seem to appear very commonly in his dreams, as a representation of his social standing, and the crazy person as representing the client's trickster phase. And the fact that he was pushed away by other people because of his trickster energy. The dream seems to be recalling an earlier phase in his life when he had that trickster energy. The animals he encountered seem to represent different parts of himself, which may have been exiled in an attempt to increase his social standing. We had different ideas about what the old woman represented and what the animals represented, but what stood out to me was the porcupine. And I offered the interpretation that the porcupine might represent the client's prickliness, so to speak. The fact that he didn't easily get along with other people and was okay pushing them away. And even to this day, he is like a very non-social person or asocial person, and so perhaps this porcupine kind of represented that. And all the fact that all of these animals were kind of exiled and kind of pushed away from the castle, these seem to be all of the parts of himself which he has pushed away in order to increase his social standing and be a more functional person in society. And so that reunion with them kind of felt like he was reunifying with old parts of himself which have gone away. The offensive soccer jerseys, very interesting, very cool in my opinion that this came up. But they could represent the fact that the client in the past tried to be so offensive to other people. Because that was his like way of being humorous. It's also possible that they represent the client's animosity towards society, which invokes his rebelliousness. Again, these animals, they seem to be opposed to whatever the castle represents. And so they perhaps represent his rebelliousness and his propensity to have animosity towards what society in general. These parts of himself are no longer present in his consciousness, but have begun to appear in his unconscious, where they still may be influencing his behavior, which is perhaps why he felt at home when he returned to the river. So not all dreams are going to be like this. Like this one was actually fairly easy to interpret and come up with a lot of ideas for. And again, we came up with quite a few ideas, like the soccer jersey thing. Um, there's actually a very natural instinct in people, and again, it manifests in sports, but it also manifests in conflicts in general, to kind of like have in groups and out groups, and to like hate the out group and to kind of like side with your in group. It's a very normal instinct that appears, but it's appearing here in a dream. And so again, this is another possible interpretation, and it kind of fit with the overall theme. And so again, dreams are not always going to be like this. Some are going to be really hard to interpret. Some the ideas are going to be really strange. They may even be a bit more graphic, a bit more messed up, for lack of a better term. But occasionally you will get dreams like this where the meaning is a lot more clear and where it can be really enriching. I remember the client being like really enthralled just by listening, like by thinking about this dream and by engaging with it, which was really cool to see. And again, like I'll just mention, this client's main goal was to increase his income, and that has really happened because he has kind of understood what was preventing him from achieving a higher income, which, and again, a lot of the symbols here are depictions of that. And because he's become more aware of it, he's been moving himself in a direction to actually make more money. He works as an artist. And so he's been making more money consequently, and again, that's been one of the consequences of dream analysis, which is really, again, like it seems like a very tangential thing, but it's actually been helpful in that regard. So yeah. So in conclusion, dreams are creative visions produced by the unconscious mind. And again, if our brains are going to such great lengths to produce these dreams and are very expending a great deal of energy to produce dreams, they must be significant. This is why therapists should consider analyzing the dreams of their clients in order to help them restore balance to an imbalanced psyche and provide life-enriching insights, which may hold the key to overcoming whatever challenges your client may be facing. So yeah, that's it. That's everything. Thank you for watching. Hope you found that interesting. And yeah,
Oh
do you have
my
any
God,
questions?
that was amazing. Thank you,
Oh, thank
Tegan.
you. You're very
Yeah.
welcome.
I missed the first bit of it. I was just running late. So yeah, the parts that I did catch, it was amazing. One thing I wanted to ask, like, so did this client had or have any resentment towards his parents for sending him to military?
So he has, at the current moment, he has a really good relationship with his parents, but he does differ from them a lot. Like his dad is this very driven, very kind of like domineering person, like a much
Hmm.
more of a go-getter, whereas the client is a bit more passive, a bit more less motivated, let's say. He did have a lot of resentment for them growing up. Like he got into fights with them all the time. He like destroyed their property on multiple occasions. He's described like a lot of fighting with them early in life, but at the current moment, he has like a very good relationship with them. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
Mhm.
interesting. Such an interesting case, and what an interesting dream. Because I was gonna
Mhm.
say, you know, the old woman, he says
Mhm.
she were like he returned to and he felt at home.
Mhm.
But the like he called it an ugly old woman. So I was like, maybe that could be his mom, but then the ugly could mean resentment towards his mom or grandma or something. I don't know. Yeah.
That's really, yeah, that's an interesting, yeah, that's so, that would be a really interesting idea I'm trying to think. I think we did try to discuss what the old women represented, and like old, like kind of women like that, yeah, they can definitely represent maternal figures in different contexts, like in positive context or in negative context. And it's actually interesting how they often appear in negative contexts as like kind of like a witch, kind of
Yeah.
like the witch in Hansel and Gretel who's like trying to devour the kids.
Yeah.
That actually is a very common thing that you'll see in dreams. But yeah, that's like a really good idea, and definitely something that if you were doing analysis with your client, you could propose that idea to see whether it clicks, whether it makes sense, or whether it isn't exactly. Maybe not. Maybe it's not a maternal figure. Maybe it doesn't represent the mom. Maybe it represents something else. So yeah, that would be a really good idea to bounce off your client.
Yeah. Awesome. I love
Mhm.
this work.
Thank you. Yeah. Hope you get to see the earlier parts of the presentation to add
Oh
some more
yeah, I
context.
will. I plan on reviewing it later on.
Awesome.
That was such an amazing presentation, Deepan. Oh my gosh, that
Thank
was
you.
really, really, really well done. Like, I'm thinking of like my clients as you were talking, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like there are some clients that I have like that are really self-aware and good at like understanding what's going on with them. And then there are others that I know like maybe I can feel like I know there's something deeper. I know they need to get
Mm,
that to that certain place, and I just can't. I don't know how to get them there. And this seems just like the perfect way to do it, especially for like, oh my gosh, the client that's an artist. I'm thinking of like, because I feel like artistic people like to come to therapy because I have
mm,
like probably I encounter more artistic people as clients than I do just like in my day-to-day like meeting random people. So I think
mm,
like artistic people would really be great at interpreting like their dreams, and they might have like more
mhm,
vivid imaginations and stuff. And yeah, I can just think of like I'm thinking of several clients that I've run into that wall with, and how this could be like a way to get past that. Um,
mhm,
so that's so cool. I love it. And then I had a question though. Do you ever encounter people who have a lot of like shame around their dreams, and how do you like the content? Because it's not as like, as you said, it's not as like suppressed by the ego. So what might be behind
mhm.
there, like sometimes it might be like really interesting, but I wonder if there's like people that have a lot of like shame around it, especially because you said there can be stuff like a lot of like infidelity or like
Mhm.
things that are more like not as like just like I don't know, PG maybe or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it does happen that clients will come and they'll like passingly mention that like they didn't record all their dreams because some of them like were too weird and too freaky and they don't want to share them. And that was okay. Like I still appreciated the fact that they gave me some dreams, but yeah, you can tell that they were ashamed of some of the things that appeared. Um, like I remember one client like made a reference to like something very grotesque involving their family members, and like it's pretty understandable that you don't want to go into that. But what I always do is I try to tell clients or remind them that this is all symbolic. Like it's not necessarily a reflection of who you are. It is more of a reflection of the ideas your mind is playing around with to generate new ideas and to generate these new symbols. So that can often be a way to get clients to realize that like, okay, it's not like me that's having these thoughts about infidelity. It's just like my brain is just kind of creating these, and maybe it represents something deeper. And so I don't have to think to myself that there's a chance that I'll cheat. Although again, I'm not. You shouldn't necessarily exclude that, but like this might be a way to get them to be okay and be comfortable, kind of expressing those dreams. But yeah, like definitely they can experience shame. They sometimes see it as a negative reflection on themselves. Like I have one client who has a lot of dreams about infidelity, and like he's okay sharing them with me, but like he's really scared about sharing them with his wife, who will probably take them the wrong way, understandably. But yeah, like he shares them with me, and we do try to approach things more symbolically rather than like, oh, you're going to cheat and it's like inevitable. And that has been like very helpful, and that has been a way for him to engage with those dreams, even though they kind of do paint him in a more negative light. So yeah. And also, can I mention something about the thing about artists is like, yeah, I think that would be a super cool thing to work on with artists. It's like an untapped, I mean, I do, Jungian psychology has a lot to say about creativity and a lot about art in general, but it is also a kind of a product of the unconscious mind, just kind of throwing ideas and kind of creatively putting things together. And so yeah, exploring the dreams of an artist can help give them a lot of ideas and help give them new things that they could potentially be working on if they're visual artists, if they're writers, and on that you can also do the same thing with you can do the same kind of analytical procedure with their works of art. So if they paint, if they make movies, if they write, I have one person. He doesn't dream so much, but he does like write a lot of fiction. And so I've been analyzing the fiction in a very similar way, like symbolically, engaging with it symbolically, because usually stories and narratives are a way to express ideas that aren't easily put into words. And so if you analyze those stories, you can get a lot of understanding. Like it's interesting. Like my clients, like different characters, how like one represents kind of like more of like his childlike nature, and one represents the parts of him that are a bit more damaged, and how he kind of expresses that that through the literature. And so you can do the exact same thing with literature, with any kind of art, and analyze it that way. So if your client isn't an avid dreamer, and not everybody is, that might be another avenue to explore, and apply some of the concepts of dream analysis too.
I never thought of that with their artwork too. Wow. Or their, oh my gosh, yeah, sounds daunting but exciting. Yeah, oh my gosh. How do you have clients with like recurrent, like the same dream?
Mhm.
They like have the same recurrent dream? Um, and like do those have like different meanings sometimes or like more significant meanings? Or what do you think of recurrent, repeated dreams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, I do have clients that will come, um, with like this very similar dream, not exactly the same, but it'll be like a very similar motif and very similar theme. Like one, for example, that comes to mind is like he'll always be on a beach with his family, and they'll always be younger. And it feels like a memory of like something in the past that just keeps coming up. And yeah, I tend to attribute more significance to dreams like that because it's kind of like the unconscious keeps sending a message, and like the message isn't received, and so it's like it keeps sending it over and over again. And so like those dreams I think are a bit more significant. If I think back to like my recurrent dreams, I had this recurrent one of like me being chased by a T-Rex, on like the house that I grew up. And I feel like I've had a pretty good understanding of what that dream represents, of like my childhood like kind of fears and like my insecurities as a kid and my anxieties. And so having kind of grasped it in that way, I don't really have that dream anymore. Um, and so, yeah, I do think that recurrent dreams probably represent something more significant, something maybe some kind of pattern, of behavior or some kind of thought pattern, which is very deep and very kind of influential in a person's mind. Again, like when we talk about the unconscious, like it does very often manifest in behaviors, and they're kind of like thoughts, but they're not explicit, and yet they're kind of like these unconscious guiding assumptions that like cause you to see things in certain ways. And like if they're really deep down, and if they're really kind of fundamental to the way you think, they're going to be influencing the structure of your dreams. And so like if you do experience recurrent dreams, it's probably an indication of something, that's very like rigid in your unconscious, that's being expressed through the dream to help give you insight into the fact that like, hey, you're thinking in this way, and it's really influential in your behavior. So yeah, I mean, there's no, again, when it comes to dreams, there's no like definite answers about any of
Yeah.
this. It is very like, again, like I like the phrase like it's more of an art than a science. And so you really have to keep that in mind when approaching dreams, and like even the nature of dreams, because still we don't really know concretely what dreams even are. These are just kind of some of the ideas which have been helpful, in making use out of dreams. So yeah.
So cool. So cool. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. Jasmine, sorry. I saw you were
Oh
gonna.
no, that's okay. That's okay. I have a dream that I now know, right? Like so like when I'm stressed, for example, or there's like struggle going on in my life, like I usually have dreams where it's like, my teeth are falling out,
Mm,
or you're standing on a high cliff or something and then you fall all of a sudden, like so that sudden drop, like and then that will wake you up. So now I know that this is like telling me, my body is telling me that you're stressed, or the stress is
mm,
present and it's showing up. So, and it has a lot of like psychodynamic um roots as well. So this whole
mm,
dream analysis.
mm,
So Freud came out with a book as well, like decades ago,
mm.
about dream analysis. I was gonna ask you if you know, like, what's the difference between Freud's and then Jung? Like,
Yeah. So let me quickly actually go back to this, I think like my second slide.
oh, it's one of
Uh,
those things that I missed. Okay.
Yeah, I briefly touched on it, but I'll just put it up there so you can see. Where is it? Here it is. Okay,
Ah, okay.
Jung's theory of dreams was like highly influenced by Freud's. And Freud, he wrote that book called The Interpretation of Dreams. And it was pretty revolutionary for its time, but a bit limited in its scope. And his idea, there's a couple of components when it comes to Freud's dream theory. The first is that it's mainly about repressed sexual impulses. So like some sexual taboo that you can't express in waking life because like society doesn't like it, or because like your religious beliefs don't like it, like it gets pushed into the unconscious where it's experienced there. And that's kind of the main source. And the thing is, this isn't necessarily wrong. I've definitely encountered dreams that were kind of this nature. But they're not all like this, and that's kind of where Jung opposed him. He was like, I don't think they're all about just sexual impulses. I think that they're also potentially expressing other things and other impulses, not just of a sexual nature. Another thing about Freud's theory is that, like, yeah, Freud himself also encountered dreams that didn't seem to be sexual at all, but then he would kind of explain that being like it's the dream trying to conceal the person's actual wishes. So it kind of like sublimates the wishes. So like a person may have these sexual fantasies, but the dream itself doesn't want to, let's say, express them. And so it expresses them in a concealed form. And like Jung thought about that. He's like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would the unconscious conceal anything? Like it's just like if you, so I was mentioning like in the presentation, about kind of like the ego. I think this is my slide relating to the ego, and how the ego is like this sensor and this it acts as a barrier to whatever you experience unconsciously. So it filters your emotions, for example. And like when you go to sleep, your ego is no longer present. And so if it's no longer present, there's no filter. And so all of these contents, all of these experiences kind of just rush up into your mind. And so there's nothing censoring the dream as Freud believed. Jung thought it was just an objective kind of depiction of unconscious processes. So yeah, that's like the main difference. The main difference being Freud thought it was all sexual. Jung thought it could be sexual, but not necessarily. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I like Jung's like interpretation. It's open to more possibilities. So
exactly, yeah. And again, I was mentioning that like Jung himself analyzed like upwards of 80,000 dreams in his lifetime, and so like he had a really good chance to study them and recognize like what the consistent features of dreams were, and so yeah, that's why it makes a lot of like his ideas make a lot more sense than Freud's, in my opinion. Although Freud, I wouldn't necessarily discount him; it's just a bit limited in scope. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate
I
that.
have one more question. So sorry. Do you have
That's okay.
clients that experience nightmares? And how would you handle a nightmare? Would you interpret
Yeah.
it, or would you like more steer away? I don't know.
Well, I would. So yeah. So I do have clients that experience nightmares. Nightmares are very common. In fact, like I think like 1/10. Okay, there's no like specific definition of a nightmare. You can just kind of define it as like a very difficult, very frightening dream. And like it's like something like 1/10 of dreams can kind of be characterized as nightmares. So they're very common, and I think that it's really important to analyze nightmares, even if they're a bit scary, because like it's like when you're awake and when you're not experiencing it, that's really the time to like go through it, because you're in a safe environment. You're not necessarily encountering whatever it was in the dream that frightened you, and so I lean more towards analyzing it and trying to figure out, and nightmares usually do express some kind of latent fear, some kind of anxiety that a person has. So I'll use myself as an example. I often have this nightmare where I'm in a school. I don't know if it's necessarily a nightmare because it's not super frightening. It's just more anxiety inducing, where I'm in a school trying to find my class, but I can't find it. And like I check every door and like every room, and like I can't find the class. And like I go into the stairwell, and like all the stairs were like, you know how like in Hogwarts and Harry Potter, like they're all moving around. That's happening, and so I can't get my balance, and it like stresses me out beyond. Like it stresses me out a lot. And so what does this dream mean? Well, it is expressing like a lot of anxiety about like school performance, about doing well, about like being like left behind in school, which I do experience and which I've had. And so again, like it's really useful to not shy away from something like that. Although obviously if a client is like, I don't want to think about that one, can we move on? Then it's probably best to respect that. So yeah.
For sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure if like um yeah, if you found it like better to like go into it and understand the meaning. It almost seems like can be like kind of like trauma processing too when you're
Right. Yeah.
like like you are it's more helpful to process it when you're safer. So I guess when you're like out of the
Hmm.
dream. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
when you talk about this, I know like I had my presentation last month, and I just think like, oh man, you would love hearing about like inner worlds and
Hmm.
systems and altars because it reminds me of a similar I bet there's a genetic link between people who are like vivid dreamers and who carry a lot of meaning in their dreams and Mm, potentially DID or potentially at least like inner world components of
Hmm.
DID because there just does sound like there's quite a bit of like crossover in just like
Hmm.
the way that like meaning can show up and stuff. It's just really interesting. I bet there's like some crossover
Hmm.
in like the processes too. So cool.
Yeah. That would be, that would be a really interesting thing to explore. But yeah, I did. I was so curious about like the inner worlds that people with DID experience and like what those are like. You were mentioning that they're like they can be very metaphorical. And so yeah, I'd love the opportunity to analyze somebody's inner world and see if that could be helpful for them to think about it and to learn about it. But yeah, I think your presentation was like really. I'm still thinking about it to this day, and I still have questions that I've written down and that I'll post to you at some point.
We'll
But
have to
yeah.
talk about these two, and they connect a lot too, I think. So it's
Mhm.
yes, so great, really, really helpful presentation. I want to
Awesome.
explore more of this for sure.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like you want to now analyze your clients' dreams or try to offer that and see if that can be helpful?
Oh, for sure. For me, for sure.
Mhm.
And it's like I said, it's like very related to psychodynamic. It's part of it,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I'm all about psychodynamic. Um,
Yeah,
so
awesome.
so yeah, I've never explored it, but like I always was like wanting to do it, but then I was like, I don't know how to, and I needed a little bit more research on it. But this is such
Mhm.
a great info on it to get me started.
Yeah, yeah. I can even recommend some books. Maybe I'll send them to you.
Yeah.
I actually have them as PDFs if that's okay.
Oh
And
yeah,
then
yeah, that'd be great.
yeah, yeah, they can be. Those are the ones that I'm kind of leaning on when it comes to the theory that I'm explaining. And there's other theories
Oh,
beyond just Jung and Freud, and
yeah.
it might be a good idea to like get it some knowledge about those as well, just to like widen the perspective. But yeah, I can send those to you, and hopefully you can find those helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. And it's such a like it varies from culture to culture as well. So I know in
Hmm.
my culture, dreams are huge, right? Like it's very important to interpret them.
Hmm.
Like so I'm from Pakistan and it's
Hmm.
like there's dream analysis like symbols representation like it's just widely distributed and you can buy
Hmm.
them almost every family has it at home and then they're like
Hmm.
there's always like that grandma that goes like oh you had a dream come sit like let's talk about it
Yeah.
and they're like teeth falling out okay this is what it means right yeah
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that there are dream interpretation traditions. The ancient Egyptians had a very interesting one, and like the same thing, they had like these guidebooks for like, oh, you saw a cat in your dream. This is what it means.
yeah
Um,
yeah
yeah, funny enough, when I was working with my Jungian analyst therapist, like she had a very similar book, and I remember like specifically telling her about like owls I saw in my dreams, and like she like dug through this book and found this page about owls and like how Athena, like the goddess Athena, she's represented by owls, and like they represent wisdom, but they can also represent darkness and all this stuff, and it's really cool. And yeah, one of those books could actually be helpful. The one thing that I would say is that. You shouldn't always think that they have like those kind of concrete rigid meanings. It really
hmm
depends on like the context of the client's life. Like I brought up this example of like water. Like
hmm
if water appears in your client's dreams like a lake or an ocean, there might be like a general interpretation of what that means, but like there could be a more specific interpretation if your client is had like experienced drowning in the past or like almost drowned in the past, or if they're a swimmer, like then water might carry a different meaning for them specifically. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, bye, Isabella.
Sorry, I have
Thanks
to
for
head out,
joining me.
but we'll
No
talk
worries.
more about this for sure.
Definitely. Take care. Thanks for
Take
joining.
care.
Thank you.